Wondering how you can become better at running your business? Entrepreneurship can be stressful. There's too much to do and not enough time. If you're isolated in your daily decisions, have no fear. Success and balance are possible. Welcome to the Small Business Answer Man podcast, where you master the art of running a successful business using practical advice from experts who want to help you succeed. Now, here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great podcast. I tell you, this second quarter, I told you what I wanted to do is find people that can make a difference for yourself for the rest of this year and going into next year. And our goal this quarter was really to find guests that can help us in different areas. And one of those areas is really that finance area, that profit area in our business, but also it's about also our wealth of what we can do to generate that wealth. Today, I found that guest with us, and he's with us. Derek, would you share with our listeners, as they listen to this podcast, what problem will you help them solve?
Well, I believe we're in a time where learning how to be creative in your deal structuring and using creative finance in lieu of banks, there's never been a better time. And I'm going to absolutely help you through that, as well as teach you how I get people through proper negotiations to be open to creative deal structuring and creative finance.
Well, this is so important because we've seen what's happened to interest rates and how they've went up over the last couple of years. And really, we're seeing it's going to be staying in place for a longer time. So today with this is Derek Dominic, and he's a successful investor, national speaker, and an international best-selling author. He has surfed up the ups and downs of the market since 2003. Derek, it is great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, it's my pleasure, Gary. I really appreciate you having me.
Well, you talked about that finance area, and I think maybe a good way, let's set a base for the group and stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about financing and also negotiation, but let's talk a little bit about this creative financing that you're talking about. What do you mean by that? Because for a lot of people, maybe they've never done it, but going to the bank when they buy a building or buy a vehicle or whatever it is and think they go to what we would call the traditional route.
Yeah, and I have probably a different definition of creative finance than most. A lot of people are out there buying properties using subject to purchases, seller finance purchases, lease options, straight options, and all of those are really just a way to finance. What I consider creative is when you stack these strategies together to solve somebody's real estate problem or business problem if you're buying out somebody's business. And so subject to is not creative. It's just another way to finance, but stacking them up, and I can give you some stories and examples, and you'll see how that stacks.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because that may get them to really see, what do you mean by that? So let's talk about how could they stack up some of those different ways to be able to do it to get that financing.
Well, Gary, I'll tell you just a quick story about a deal I did. And so there was a woman named Jan. She needed to sell her house. And she needed to sell it rather quickly due to some family issues. She needed to relocate out of state. There was not a lot of equity in her home. And in fact, she was behind on payments by 2 months. And at that time, now I live in the Midwest, so these numbers, take them with a grain of salt if you're on the East Coast or West Coast. But she wanted $105,000 for her house. She owed about $62,000 on a first mortgage. She wanted $10,000 cash, and the rest she would take in payments over time. So I said, great. I caught up the loan and took that sub 2. She carried back her financing at 0% interest, which came out to about 6 years of payments. And I needed to put about $5,000 worth of just cosmetic updating in order to put a tenant in the property with a lease option. Now, Gary, I have this religion again about not using my own cash when I do real estate deals. So I needed about $20,000 of cash to do the deal. $10,000 to Jan up front, $5,000 to update the property and catch up her payments. So I then approached a financial friend, and I'm very nosy with what my financial friends have in their retirement accounts and cash. called my financial friend Dan, and I said, Dan, I need $20,000. I'll give you 6% interest only quarterly payments, and I'll give you 20% of the equity when we sell the property in the future. To which he said, absolutely, I'm in. So I'm in the deal with nothing out of my pocket. We do the rehab. We put tenants in the property. They give us an upfront option fee, which goes towards their purchase as long as they successfully exercise their option. And they lived in the property for a couple of years, went and got their own financing, paid us off, paid Dan off, paid Jan off, paid Jan's bank off. Everybody got what they wanted. And that is deal stacking and creative deal structuring.
Yeah, that's definitely a way to make it happen. And like you said, you had no cash out of the deal to be able to really make that happen. So that's very interesting how you can do that. How did you kind of get into this? What I would call that is somewhat, it's kind of like private lending.
Well, I actually did co-own a private lending company for 10 years up until recently. And the way that came about is we were raising private money for our own real estate transactions, and we got to a point where we had more money than deals. However, by building a network, we also had plenty of friends that could find deals but needed the money. So our investors wanted to keep their money working. They trusted us, and we were, an arbitrage lending company where we would underwrite the deals, vet the deals, pay our investors 9 to 10% return on their money, lend it out at 12 to 13% with some points to our borrowers. And that was the lending business. Now, as far as my own real estate transactions, that's where it's not as cut and dried. It is deal by deal. So there's always some variances in it. But just over time, I have not used a bank for a real estate transaction since 2011.
Wow.
And honestly, if I get real serious with you and your audience, I think using banks should be the second or third option always. Because I got my butt kicked in 2007 when the markets crashed. And the only thing I knew was to use banks, including a home equity line of credit, which honestly makes me cringe every time I hear somebody say I'm taking out a HELOC on my personal home to gamble on my first or second or third real estate deal ever. I mean, you're risking your family's home. And I lost I had a $4 million portfolio in 2006, and it went down to about $1 million in 2007. And I lost just about everything. So that's when I was forced to learn not only how to get creative, but I had to learn how to talk to people and properly negotiate with people. And it became a passion of mine to the degree of to this day, I teach negotiations to other people, but I'm always a student. I am always looking for another little nuance, little way, just a little tip. And I think it's those of us that are in this game to continuously get better, that's part of the challenge.
Yeah. I love that you talked about negotiation because, I told you before we came on, a lot of mine are small business owners that are listening to this. And negotiation means so many things, and it can help you so much in business. So do you mind sharing a little bit of some of them nuggets that you've learned with negotiation that business owners could think about? Because, they're buying products and services. Every day really is a negotiation. I mean, we do it with our children sometimes, especially when they're younger, trying to get them to do certain things. But we also do it in the business world all the time, but people don't call it that. But if they would, I think they could become better negotiators and get a better deal on products and services and other things that they're purchasing for their business.
For sure, Gary. And what you have to realize is every day, every social interaction that you're in, whether it's with your children, your spouse, or a business deal, a contractor, literally every social interaction is a negotiation. And you are either going to be the alpha or the beta in every one of those social interactions. And if you're the beta, you're not leading that to a preconceived, conclusion that you want. Now, that's not to say that you should manipulate or try and take advantage of people. I firmly believe that a proper negotiation, everybody walks away happy and satisfied with the transaction. But one of the tips I would give you, Gary, real quick, is I want to try and figure out what the type of person that I'm talking to, what their nature or their natural state is. Meaning, are they analytical? Are they a quick decision maker, otherwise known as a driver? Are they more social conscious or social in nature? And for me, I'm a quick decision maker. I'm a driver. If you put a lot of charts, graphs, and spreadsheets in front of me, I'm going to get bored and I'm going to tune out. Well, I have to know that about myself, because if you're analytical and we're in a negotiation, I have to speak your language or you're not going to hear me. So I try within every 2 to 3 minutes of every conversation, figure out what that person, how they hear what I'm saying, and cater everything to that moving forward. And just that tip alone will change so much of your successes.
Yeah, understanding communication and those styles, I tell you, that is one of the greatest things to learn. We're going to talk a little bit more about this as we come back, but right now we need to take a short commercial break. And now back to the show. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the negotiation. We talked about how important it is to know those different styles of communication, know who we're communicating with. But what would you say, like you said, it's not about taking advantage of someone, but it's also making sure that you really are getting the best for you or for your company and stuff. So how can I do that in a negotiation without, trying to take advantage of someone?
Well, the reality is, if you have the right morals and ethics and you're truly trying to help people, you don't even have to voice what you're trying to achieve. You just start solving their problems. And if you're solving their problems, if it's in alignment with your goals or not. So I focus 100% of every negotiation on the client. What can I do to help you? And in our earlier story about Jan, I had to get her to open up. And so for me, I'm in a lot of residential real estate, some commercial, but let's just take residential. If I'm taking a phone call or I'm in person with somebody, again, within the first 2 or 3 minutes, I have an elevator pitch. And I want to let people know that I have multiple ways I can help them. So Gary, if you were the home seller, I would say something like this. Gary, we buy houses in several different ways. All cash is not a problem, but that's typically my lowest offer because I'm tying up cash. If that doesn't work for you, we could take over your debt if you have debt payments. If you don't, we can make payments to you over time. Or in some cases, we just lease your property and we put what's called an option in place and buy it at a later date. That works really well with landlords who are trying to offset capital gains. I say all this, Gary, just so you know, there's multiple ways I can help you, but I am going to ask you some questions that most people wouldn't. Is that okay? And a pitch.
Right.
Now with that pitch, you've just given me permission to ask anything I want. So if I start asking about your debt or any of your challenges and you start to get upset, I just go back and say, hey, Gary, remember at the beginning of the conversation, I told you I was going to have to ask some questions. I'm really not trying to pry in your personal, business. I just want to know how I can help you. And that de-escalates them. And then you go on. So you want to figure out a pitch that's natural for you to say. You can tell I've said that thousands of times. It rolled off the tongue, right? But that in itself, again, is something almost nobody does. And you can do that regardless of your industry, regardless of its real estate, commercial, residential, doesn't matter. Figure out a way to make people comfortable early on. And again, your success will go up significantly.
Yeah, and I think the thing about it is it's really about having that upfront agreement, and you're getting that from the client there, and you're communicating with them in a natural style. Like you said, nobody knows that you've done it 1,000 times, but it's very natural to you to be able to say it, but you're saying the key points in there, and you're getting them to commit that you can ask those questions. And once you get that permission, of course, people are more willing to do that.
Well, and Gary, everybody says, how do I find creative deals? How do I find seller finance deals? You don't find them. Those transactions come together because of conversations and negotiations. So I've already told them in the first couple minutes, hey, you know what? If my cash offer doesn't work for you, let's discuss these other options. Well, 99% of our leads didn't know they wanted to potentially take payments or let us take over their payments. We led them down that path. But everyone that's out there is saying, well, I called my realtor, or I called a realtor, and I asked if the seller would finance. Well, of course, the answer is no. The seller doesn't know you. You don't know the seller. You really have to get face to face with people, direct to seller, direct to consumer, to put together creative deals in most cases.
Yeah. And what it really does, it's giving them options. I've heard before in pricing, when people do pricing, if you do good, better, and best, people know they have options. And what you're doing is you're sharing more than one option at the time. They may only thought there was one. So I think this is important for business owners that you can really gather some information out of this is, for your business, maybe it's not about negotiating, but more about maybe part of it is you need to find out what are the options that would be best for them and having that discussion up front. Let's talk about before our time runs out here. You kind of talk about, and you have it on your screen even there, because we're communicating via Zoom because we can watch this on YouTube, but also we have it as a audio podcast here and stuff on that side. And you talk about generations of wealth. So I'm going to ask you because I'm not going to assume anything and I get in trouble when I do that. Plus, I'm trying to ask the questions I think my clients want me to ask or our listeners do. So, what do you mean by what is generations of wealth?
So Generations of Wealth is my platform. My podcast is called The Generations of Wealth, which you can find at thegenerationsofwealth.com. And what this is we believe in leading your life with a vision in place, a personal vision to begin with, and then a business vision to support your personal life. And so our tagline is live your vision, love your life. I'm very passionate about it because for the first 2/3 of my career, the last 21 years in business, I did not do this. I was the guy that was working 7 days a week, answering the phone anytime it rang, telling my kids to be quiet, interrupting family time. And that's because we didn't have a vision. We didn't know what was against the rules, what wasn't against the rules, right? And we entrepreneurs, we're all typically afraid of missing a deal. So gosh, we got to work, we got to take the call. And so once I figured out, along with my wife, Tracy, what do we want our personal life to look like? I didn't have 50 or 60 hours a week to work. And so Generations of Wealth is not only passing on knowledge and information about how to make money, it's about time wealth, spiritual wealth, your health, all of the things that really are important. I could make a lot more money if I wanted to work 7 days a week, but to what end? If it means that I'm lonely and my family leaves me, my kids won't talk to me, or my health goes to hell, what was the point? So that's really our passion now, and same thing that you do. We bring on fantastic, experts in a lot of different genres and different businesses, and try and spread more knowledge.
Yeah. It's interesting because we have similar philosophies there because I did the same thing early in my career, fighting for that success, as I call it. My company name's Ascend Business Strategies for a reason. You can ascend to the top of the mountain, have all the money you want, but guess what? If you left everybody at the bottom of the hill, guess what? You're going to be pretty lonely up there. You may have a lot of money, but you're going to have to buy your friends because they won't be there. Plus, as we know, as you find out in life real quick, it goes by pretty darn fast. And for the younger business owners, if you're here listening, how are you creating that? Looking at your time. I love that. Live your vision, love your life. Really setting out what do you want from that? Because otherwise we strive for success. And really what we're all looking for, Derek's getting it too, is we're looking for significance in our life.
Absolutely. And I was challenged a few years ago because I was envious of a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, that he took a 30-day RV trip with his family. And he challenged me. He said, okay, is it in your vision? I said, well, it is now. And so for the last 3 summers, my family has taken 5 to 6 week trips, cross country in our travel trailer, our fifth wheel travel trailer. No really, big plans, just going and seeing friends of ours all over the country. Last year, we actually spent almost 3 weeks in Europe and then another 3 weeks traveling here in the United States. And I say all that to say, I challenge all of your listeners at some point, try and take 30 days off. See how your vision and your world is different at the end. The very first time I did it, I mean, the first week I was a nervous wreck. The second week I started to kind of calm down and realize, hey, my staff and everybody was doing their job. I didn't have to micromanage everybody. By the end of the fourth week, and when we came back the fifth week, I changed my entire business model. I didn't want to do as much rehabbing as we were doing. I didn't care about the number of deals we were doing. And it's definitely something that almost nobody ever does, but it'll change your life.
Yeah. I think the challenge we give them is, hey, if you can't do that for 30 days and you can't even fathom it, your vision is off.
Yes.
Because otherwise, really what you've got is you've got a glorified job.
Mm-hmm.
You own the company, but actually